Aliens is not so much the sequel to Alien as it is the sequel to the late night diner conversations about Alien. It gives us the coolness and the novelty of the original by taking those ideas and questions and expanding them. What is the world of Alien like, and how does it differ from the world now? What kinds of weapons do they have in this world? What if instead of blue-collar workers, the alien was up against a band of gun-toting, foul-mouthed, trigger-happy space marines? Our story opens with the sole survivor of the first film, Ripley, still in a heavy cryosleep as the salvage team finds her and her cat 57 years after the events of the original. After recounting the events that left her crew dead, she is held accountable for her actions of self-preservation, which, coincidentally, resulted in the destruction of corporation property totaling into tens of millions. The Weyland-Yutani Corporation quickly revokes our heroine's flight license, telling her that the planet whose distress signal they responded to has been colonized for the last 20 years, therefore throwing her testimony out in an act of true douchebaggery. Fast forward to Ripley taking the only job she can on the loading docks when, out of the blue, Weyland-Yutani loses contact with their colony. Asking for Ripley's help, the corporation leverages the reinstatement of her flight license, and Ripley, along with company rep Paul Reiser and a group of surly firepower-packing Marines, is on her way to LV-426. The rest of the film follows a core group of the soldiers, along with Ripley and Reiser's character Burke, as they attempt to escape the legions of aliens on LV-426 with their lives. Although we are treated to a who survives and what will be left of them formula, Cameron's approach almost single-handedly redefined the subgenre of sci-fi action. There is a giddy love and reference for Scott's universe that makes Cameron's film approachable, and in some terms a more mainstream and digestible approach to the franchise. Cameron's soldiers are stereotyped, sure, but are still likable, and we genuinely want to see them live to fight another day. Ripley is stronger, and somehow her wisdom in the face of Weyland-Yutani's greedy naivety makes her ever more the hero. Henriksen's take on the human-loving android Bishop again brings our audience to sympathize with yet another character, this one almost incapable of complete destruction, yet somehow we still fear for his safety. Again, we are dealing with expansion, this time of the classic character archetype. So it might all seem like glitz and spent shells, but Aliens introduces an interesting social narrative into the film that continues throughout the rest of the series. The aliens, as vicious as they are, represent an investment, and corporations like to earn a return on their investments. As Ripley and the Colonial Marines fight for their lives, Reiser's Burke fights for a sinister corporate agenda, and the real monster finally makes its appearance. It is Weyland-Yutani's deception and ultimately inhuman lust for profit shares that makes our character's struggles that much more personal. It has often been said that to compare Scott's Alien to Cameron's Aliens is like comparing apples to oranges. I disagree. I think the inability to compare the two should be a hallmark of any great episodic story. Not only did Alien set a benchmark for genre sequels, it also set a benchmark for Cameron's career as he went on to direct the current top 2 worldwide grossing films of all time. My only criticism of Aliens is not a fault of its own, but in that its iconic action movie portrayal of the Marines has been so overused and copied over the last 26 years that in retrospect it is almost a parody of itself. Well, that and the director's choice not to use Queen's Killer Queen when we first see the Queen alien, which would have been balls out awesome.
That is great.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good points there, man.
Ash, I think my new favorite idea is making a sequel not to the film, but making a sequel to the conversations about the film.
Yeah.
That is one of the most astute observations I've ever heard, and I'm going to steal that from you and use it in the future.
Well, at least we've been able to coin the term here, so the theft will still be persistent, but we know where it originated. So,
and they'll wonder where it came from, no doubt.
Right, we've got it on record. But yeah, that's how I really felt about this film. It would have been a very logical choice to take the same scenario in the original and sort of overlay a paint-by-number script and just try to replicate the high points of it. But, I really think that the film was a what-if scenario. These were people that were sitting around going, wouldn't it be cool if this happened? What if this would happen? How can we make this happen? And fortunately, some pretty good decisions actually came out of those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big, I guess now that I think about it, one of the big questions that I have about the whole series is just how much did the original Alien have in mind with, the space jockey and the engineer and what the aliens are and how they reproduce and their whole I think it's called eusocialism or whatever. They're eusocial like a wasp or whatever, a bee. Was that all in place, do you think, in the original Alien? And they had that much discipline or whatever it was to not get into it, to leave it for, James Cameron to come along and talk about it?
I think that one of the strengths of Alien, we talked about the mystery of it, was the fact that it hinted at bigger ideas.
Right.
And I think that that could have been a very standalone approach to one movie. Was, let's make the audience speculate. Let's give them something to talk about that falls outside of the sort of one, two, three punch of the film,
Right.
and how the film was brought to its conclusion, but have something that's persistent, something that persists far beyond it. So whether or not they actually felt, I think that that was going to be expanded on. I think that they really capitalize on this idea of let's hint at bigger things. And if we hint at
Right.
bigger things, we can show a scope outside of what the camera sees that makes the film a little more epic,
Hmm.
even with the fact that it's obviously a very intimate setting with a very limited cast.
Yeah, I mean, it's just pretty amazing. It's hard to do this. It's hard to see this all while you're watching all these films all together. And I gotta be honest with you guys, I watched Aliens and then Alien 3, like back to back, like a double feature, pretty much. And
I did too.
I'm I'm having trouble like discerning one from the other. And Alien and Prometheus, I'm like, because it's different when you see these films, once every 5 years or whatever, to 8 years or whatever it is, and then you see them all bunched up, and I'm having trouble like really getting a clear idea. And it's actually worthwhile to bring up is did they think that this was going to turn into a franchise from the get-go? I mean, they do a little bit of revising here and there, but it seems like all those parts are like there's nothing like that's really contradictory in the sequels that couldn't have been case made for in the original. You know what I mean? So like Ash, what do you think? You think they had that plan from the beginning and they just,
I think it was
I
just luck. I think they just
yeah,
stumbled upon something that worked because if you really look at the formula, aside from the bigger ideas here, and the much grander, larger themes in the first movie, it's still a killer in the closet, kind of thing,
hmm hmm
and it just took the formula for a horror movie and let's go ahead and displace our heroes and put them on a spaceship and
right.
let's add these other things into it. And I think that it was the ideas behind it, this idea of, well, hey, we've got these great set designs, and these set designs speak of something bigger, and they speak of something that's
Right.
pre-existing.
So in a way they stumbled upon it, you're saying.
I
And
think it
then
was just
and the,
luck. Yeah, I think it was just
yeah.
dumb luck.
Yeah, and you know what? That's sort of what we were poking at with the George Romero Night of the Living Dead thing. It's funny that you bring that up, man, because that it's coming out like this because this movie reminded me a lot of the second Dead movie, uh, Dawn of the Dead, where it takes what was stumbled upon in the original, which is something really at its root a primal, almost mythology or myth that wasn't quite defined in the first one, and then they start to define it, and then it's just odd because even the setting sort of reminds me of it, like the way that the farmhouse in the first Night of the Living Dead
Hmm.
relates to the mall in the second film is
Right.
almost the way that the singular set in Alien relates to the colony in the second film. You know what I mean? Like it's a weird thing that just popped into my head. I don't know if I was
Well,
completely off
no,
base
I
with
mean
it.
it's typical sequel protocol, is
Right.
to always expand, expand, expand. I mean, Ash, you probably know more about this than any of us, but I occasionally I see a new Mila Jovovich movie where she's destroying zombies, and it's the Resident Evil series.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I have only seen the first one years ago, but every time I see a new trailer, she's like blowing up cities and now she's blowing up planets and pretty soon she's going to cause the destruction of the known universe. Like it just is an ever expanding circle. And there's
Right.
a danger in that too. And I mean, they consciously went the other direction for Alien 3. It was a very deliberate process of scaling back from what could have been, an even bigger epic setting,
Yeah, and I thought Aliens was strong, and then I put Alien 3 on. I thought that was actually even a stronger film in a
Mm.
lot of ways, you know.
Well, to go to the discussion of intention, I have never read or heard anything that the makers of Alien intended it to launch a franchise. I mean, even that idea was actually pretty new at the time, that science fiction even
Right,
could be a series. Star Wars was such an exception, and Empire Strikes Back hadn't come out yet,
right.
so there was no guarantee that a science fiction and everyone was jumping on the bandwagon. They were trying to make Star Trek the motion picture, and that had stalled for a long time until Star Wars came out. So everyone was scrambling to come up with their own version of it. But I've never heard anything that said people thought Alien would be a franchise.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing that they put all this stuff in the backstory and don't drag it out into the light and beat it to death. I mean,
Well, that's
it really
experimental,
shows.
and that's because Dan O'Bannon has, as a screenwriter, he had a history of, comic book writing and all of that stuff. And there was just a general atmosphere that Ridley Scott was very much a part of, where there was a sense of experimentation a little bit. They were both steeped in the heavy metal comic books and all of that stuff. And there was, a desire to create that world to go into, and the studio didn't always get that. I mean, they tried to undercut it a lot by
Right.
preventing them from building sets and all of that. But, it just didn't.
Yeah, I mean, just one last comment on that. I think that there was a deleted scene, and God, it sounds such movie geek stuff. There was a deleted scene in the original Alien that showed the the Scarrett character as being used as a
Yeah,
cocoon.
cocooned up to the
S-
wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that Cameron came in and took advantage of that and built upon that, even though it wasn't even shown in the first
Yeah.
one originally, you
Well,
know.
Ash, I have a question for you. How long, I mean, going back all these years later and looking at Aliens from 1986, do you, I mean, do you find the characters you pointed out that the team of Space Marines has been it's been a cliche that's warmly welcomed into 1,000 movies since.
Right.
Do you feel looking back at it that there's just a level of silliness to it, or do you think do you think it holds up?
It's hard not to see a little bit of silliness in it. I mean, it really is. Just because, the concept of sort of these, interstellar badasses has just been so overused. It's been so milked. And
Mm,
even though we're sort of seeing the origin of that concept, we had seen it before, but we really hadn't seen it to this extent. And it really took it and it really created that template that had been used so many times. When you look at it, there are some silly moments, and I don't know if it's silly based on the treatment, or like I said before, if it's silly just based on the fact that we're looking at it in retrospect, and we're sort of looking at the fact that this has been sort of parodized or parodied so many times
Mm.
right.
that
Do you feel
it's
that the
it's difficult to unwatch what came after it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right, right, right.
Do you feel that it was inappropriate of the Motion Picture Academy to pass up Bill Paxton for a Best Supporting Actor Oscar?
He's great. That's
There
funny.
should never be a time where Bill Paxton should be passed up for Best Supporting Actor.
That's
He
His
just
kind
stunning
of
work in the
walks off.
Fish Heads video still rattles me to this day.
that's funny.
He kind
You
of
know,
walks off with this movie a little bit because there's just a few things you remember really vividly, coming out of the movie, and he's one of them. Like just that great line, "Game over, man." That
yeah,
that
he's
echoes from
fantastic,
my
man.
childhood. Like to this day, when I get into certain situations, I hear Bill Paxton in the background screaming, "Game over, man."
Well, and that was interesting that they effectively created caricatures out of these
Well, Cameron
personalities.
did, yeah.
Such a
And it's,
Cameron thing, man. I mean,
oh, yeah,
he's like he like obviously the film. I mean, just to set the stage, I friggin' loved Aliens when I was a kid, and
Oh yeah.
going back. now, it was a little bit too cartoony for me, and I thought that I mean I could nitpick a lot of stuff in the movie, but I won't get into it. But the funniest thing is that James Cameron has this whole metaphor in the movie that it was designed off of a Vietnam experience. He wanted to make a movie basically that was a metaphor for people going into a situation in which all of their grand technology was hopelessly outwitted by survival instincts and so forth. And he's been pretty much milking that theme his whole career. Um, but yeah, it's just funny to see this incredibly macho group of guys and everything, and he does that so well. It becomes like a parody of itself. Like Aliens, you don't even have to make a parody of that because it's pretty much already. I think Ash, you put that in your review. It's a parody of itself.
Yeah.
All right. Well, was this Cameron's first or second film
Second
that
film.
he?
There's actually an interesting story behind that I didn't know about. He hadn't even completed The Terminator yet, which was his
Oh,
first film.
right.
But he got
Okay.
into talks with someone. He had worked for Roger Corman for years. He started out as a special effects guy with Roger Corman, and he
And
and John,
Piranha too, right?
yeah, and John Sayles and he were buddies. And there's a whole group of people that came out of that. Joe
Right.
Dante, I think, and he had not Terminator had not been released yet, but he got into talks with some people at Fox, and he loved the first Alien movie, and there was talk of a sequel happening, and he went and pitched some ideas and then brainstormed a treatment, and they said, well, we love it. If Terminator is a success, you get to make Alien sequel,
Oh,
and that's
cool.
how it worked.
Yeah. Well, I did notice this, and I was actually struck a little bit. Is that, um, it's the same. It's the same plot almost, or there's a lot of the same similarities to Avatar,
Oh yeah.
and not the least of which is the end scene where she gets into that robot suit and battles the alien, where it's the robot suit is the bad guy in Avatar, versus the
There's a
Avatar.
Roger
So.
Corman movie he did before that also has the exact same thing.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. And I mean the whole Marine thing, working class, Marine guys, going in and, being overseen by a company and I mean that's all right there. I mean this guy's almost just making what's he do? He sit down and like, oh, I'm gonna write the next $100 million movie. What can I think of? Oh yeah, I'll just use the same thing that I did 30 years
Yeah.
ago.
He's boiling it down to you can make God bless him. I mean, I have great love for James Cameron. If for so many reasons, I think he's a brilliant technician, and he pushes a lot of the technology of film in a way that few guys do, and so forth and so on. But as a writer, he knows exactly the points he has to hit to get a million thousand billion people in the theater, and he
Yeah.
just leans on it every time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's also just like Scott, he's got a slightly different aesthetic, obviously, but he knows how
I
to
think
make
I
the
think Ridley
prices.
Scott is more daring than James
Yeah.
Cameron, but you're also, I mean, in I know that in Joe's universe, you're starting to split hairs pretty fine there.
Yeah. I mean, I could tell the difference in their style and everything, but honestly, he's good at working the machinations or machinations of cinema. I mean, that whole scene, like, it's almost astounding that they can have that scene go on, in the third act or whatever, and on and on and
It's
on. And I
basically the
was,
last 40 minutes of the movie.
yeah, I mean, but I was still like with it the whole time and
Yeah.
completely riveted the whole time. I mean,
That's
that's
I
really a
wanted to
testament to
ask
the
you
guy's
guys
ability.
about that because the like when I was a kid, this Aliens actually holds a special place for me because it was one of the last movies I ever saw. That I think I saw it in my late teens, like 15 or so, and it was one of the last movies that outright scared the shit out of me. The entire like I just wanted to look away from the screen the whole time, and that was basically, that was ringing the bell. After that, it was, I grew up and it was very hard for a movie to scare me. And I just remember the feeling of horror and devastation by the end of the film, where it's just nonstop pounding your senses to smithereens, and you feel like like you feel traumatized afterward, you know. Did you guys have anything like that? And did you think that actually that experience still kind of hits those nerves again watching it all these years later?
There were elements of Aliens that I did still find horrifying, especially when I was younger. I think that it was a very well thought out answer to the question of, what happens when you have the capability to fight one of these things? Okay, well, the answer is now we're going to give you 10,000 of them to fight.
Right,
So,
right.
Video game
I think
logic.
exactly. And I think that it was the sheer number of them. And especially, again, we've got a lot of point of view sequences too. I
Hmm.
mean, where even though we had that sense of confinement in Alien, we still had some nice rotating shots, and we were still a third person godlike perspective looking down on these characters. Um, we've got a lot more point of view shots in Aliens, a lot more first person perspective in Aliens.
Mm. Like
So
point of view of the human characters.
right, and it sort of gave us that idea of a first person shooter video game before those were hugely popularized because this was
Mm.
back in '86.
Hmm.
So
Right.
we're getting that thrill. We talked about sort of Aliens the ride. Well, maybe this was sort of like the low rent Aliens the ride.
Right.
We're
Right.
able to see it through
This
the
was the
cameras. We're able to,
Wolfenstein 3D.
right, exactly. Yeah, and at the time was extremely effective because when you remember these sequences, especially as a child, you tend to remember them as the way that they were presented in the film. So when you're remembering Alien, you're remembering looking at Sigourney Weaver and looking at the xenomorph being over her shoulder.
Mm.
But then you're looking at Aliens and you're looking at you carrying the gun, you being totally immersed in this very, um, biomechanical, very tailored environment that they have made for themselves, and they're around you and they're coming you, and they're just huge, huge numbers.
I
And
do see aliens from over the barrel of a gun in my imagination.
Yeah. Well, they're coming through the video monitors a lot of the time too. So it's like we're watching what they're
Is
watching.
that
Because
the POV shot you talk about, Ash?
yeah, exactly.
like when they set up the sentries and all the aliens are coming, and there are a lot of video monitors in this. So and there's a lot of people looking at video monitors. Yeah, I got you. I get you totally.
But
When they're going into the lair, Billy, and then they all have cameras on their
Hmm.
heads, So
Which is a pretty
it's
brilliant device.
yeah, yeah,
it really did, it really played up to that sense of immersion. And I think that we've tried to replicate that so many times, especially in movies that are, reality based filming, and these found footage films. But this
right.
obviously did
Hmm.
it by a way of just,
He
injecting it
was,
into the narrative.
yeah, he was like 10, 15 years ahead of his time on that score.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, do you want to talk about how the remainder of the Alien series, just in general terms? I actually have only seen Aliens 3. I've really tried to stay away from the Alien versus Predator films, and I've been meaning to see Resurrection for since it came out, but I've never actually got around to it. That being said, Aliens 3 or Alien 3, I thought it was a really strong picture. I actually sort of liked it better than Aliens.
I've had a love hate relationship with Alien 3 because it's man, the Alien series has this weird karma about it that they do everything wrong, but it somehow works. Like they fuck up that series every time, and it somehow works. And uh, three
It's
amazing.
almost like a part of the implausibility and the cliches are actually part of the success of the
Well, it's
series
almost
because
like the producers try to sabotage. They try to shoot themselves in the foot, and accidentally, good things come out of it anyway. James Cameron, obviously a brilliant director. Ridley Scott, brilliant director, and along comes David Fincher. And I really loved watching Alien 3 this time. I thought it was a stark and
yeah, me
lonely,
too.
and my biggest beef with the film is the special effects. they just shortchanged the movie on the special effects. That animated alien looks ridiculous, and
Yes, that's true.
all of the exterior special effects shots, the plates of satellites turning and ships coming down through the atmosphere, those just look like comps that were never intended to be released, and
Yeah.
they really shot it in the foot that way. But Fincher is fucking brilliant in this movie. The way he
Yeah.
controls that atmosphere, you know.
Yeah, it's that atmosphere that he's able to bring to the table with Aliens 3. It would be a candidate for doing what Lucas did with the Star Wars
Hmm.
pictures and put it in something, better special effects.
Well, Joe,
Eh,
question for you though on that score. As much as I liked the tone of the movie, I felt that as soon as the Doctor character died, the movie mostly lost me. I could take one scene of them trying to kill the alien in the hallways, but after that, it was basically that was the halfway point, and then the second half of the movie is just them running around the hallways trying to
yeah,
kill people.
Yeah. Well,
And
it
I
became a
felt
game
like
of
it just,
mousetrap.
yeah, and I was like,
right,
well, we've already
right.
seen this. This is the first Alien movie, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Well, like I said, they all start to blur together. But what strikes me about Aliens 3 is just what you said, man. Is way of handling atmosphere and dread. It just works. I totally get what you're talking about because yeah, I tuned out, but it was like I was able to tune out after seeing all these other Alien movies and be like, it's kind of like I went on autopilot and I was like, wow, that first half was really cool, and then like the second half just kind of flew by, because
yeah.
I was just waiting for the end to happen. I was like, those dissolves were really great, it's
Yeah.
that kind of
Oh,
stuff, and
I know exactly the one you're talking about. You're talking about the three heads.
the three heads, and then he actually starts the movie off with a dissolve of her face over the falling casket-like ship or whatever. I think it was falling to the planet. Like it's like one of the opening shots of the film.
Uh,
But yeah, he did a few dissolves that were really striking because they were never done before in the film.
mm.
But yeah, just amazing that these three directors came out. Ash, do you have any general comments about Alien 3 or the series in general as far as where it went after we're leaving off here at Aliens, but it obviously went on for another 10 years or so before I don't even know. I'm afraid to even look at what Alien versus Predator. It just sounds like a video game to me. So
It
it's like
was
I
a
have
video
no.
game, Atari
Yeah.
Super Nintendo. I played it back in the day.
Yeah, do you have any perspective on that? Any of that, Ash?
I think it was understandable that what they couldn't do was they couldn't expand on what Cameron had done because the level of the expansion there, the just actually the level of practical special effects, everything was just ramped up. It was just a huge movie. And coming off of something like that, that's very, very difficult to follow. So I understand the logic of taking a step back and saying, listen, what worked so well about the original and what started this whole thing was this idea of taking one creature, picking off the characters. Let's try to care about the characters. Let's close in on our settings. Let's try to bring that sense of claustrophobia back into it. I understand it,
Right.
but I think you just feel as though you're watching a different person's interpretation of the first film.
Mm.
Hmm.
It
Right.
just
I
it
kind of
feels
agree with that.
yeah,
Hmm.
it feels too heavy of an overlay. It's like they wanted to bring it back to basics, but the first Alien, besides those, huge sort of unseen thematic elements we talked about, is very basic. So to take that and then to try to sort of reimagine it is a little bit difficult to do.
Hmm.
You're basically just going to sort of get a washed out product of what the original was. It's going to seem like a copy of a copy.
Right.
And even though I think the technical aspects of the film, is I think Fincher's a great director. I think he really really knows how to frame a scene.
Mm.
But from a special effects angle, like we had talked about, the fact that they chose to go CG and some of the shots that they used didn't glamorize what they did at all.
Hmm.
It
Right.
seemed very unfinished. Seemed like we were looking at composite shots. I like the film because I do like the fact that it's heavy on atmosphere, and I think tonally it hits the mark.
Hmm.
But I think that last 30 minutes is just sort of a waste of time.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and
Right.
the practical effects creature, the suit is the best one they did in the whole series. I feel it's the most articulated and interesting. But yeah, that just pretty much sinks the movie to have a poorly animated cartoon alien chasing people. I mean, Fincher obviously leaned as heavily as he could on the POV camera for for the creature with the weird lens distortion, you know.
Yeah,
But
and that's one of the films that really leans heavily on this monster vision. That again, we can look at the Alien films as really being first for a lot of things that were then overused tirelessly.
Right.
And that sort of monster vision thing now is in every, made for sci-fi movie you can see.
yeah,
Monster vision.
yeah.
Right.
Everybody's got
Right.
monster vision, It's like,
Right.
One thing that I think is worth noting in the I mean if there's any geeks out there who have read on this, they know the production process behind Alien 3, the pre-production process was agonizing. It was brutal and horrible, and then production itself was just equally brutal, and this the studio was just hammering Fincher the whole time, and he barely survived, and all of that. But the interesting thing that I think they bring to this one is continuing the theme of life feeding on life and the endless vicious cycle of procreation and digestion and all that. It's really cool that they set this in a colony of monks, basically, And
right.
it's in the earlier drafts of the script, there was a concept that everyone loved, and it never happened for one reason or another. But it was to be set on a giant wooden planet where these monks who had taken a vow of celibacy had like different levels. It was like a wooden Death Star in space, and there were these like wheat fields and wooden libraries and this whole wooden terraform structure. And it just, it was a really interesting way to tie it back to the theme of abstinence of life, denying life and
Right.
denying the cycle of all of that.
Hmm.
And when I watched Alien this time around, I realized that when those people set down on the planet and go to that ship for the first time, it's essentially people going to Dracula's castle, but on a new planet. And the ship itself, the Nostromo, when they're battling the alien, it looks like a Gothic cathedral in there. The background, there's light pouring in through these vents, and it looks like stained glass windows with light pouring in. And there's this religious symbol of abstinence in there, and I thought they picked that up in Alien 3 really well, and it made for an interesting backdrop.
Cool. Well, is there any quick comments about any of the other films in the series, or just in general the thrust of the where it went after this? Because I really can't comment on it at all. Just a couple of quick generalizations, or I just to give me a heads up. Where did it go after Alien 3? Ash, you know?
I think the absence of conversation is probably the best way to
Okay.
describe
The
where
the
it went.
the deafening silence that follows Alien
Yeah.
Resurrection.
Okay.
Alien Resurrection is pretty friggin' awful.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, good.
I,
So I'll stay away. I'll stay away from that.
I
But
mean, if you're morbidly curious, it's worth checking out because they tie the whole intermingling of species much closer together. But it's and it's by the director of City of Lost Children and
well, that's the
Delicatessen.
thing, man. I mean, City of Lost Children and Delicatessen and even Amelie.
Hmm.
I mean, they're just beautiful films. I mean, just from start to finish, they maybe up in my top 10 films. Some of
Yeah,
those films. I mean, they're just gorgeous. So that's why I've always been interested.
check it out,
I've
man.
always
Check it out. It's
yeah,
as
maybe I
long
should
as
check
you're
it
on
out.
the Alien freight train. I
Yeah,
will say
I'll bring.
it's interesting that in all this discussion about these movies, the one thing we haven't talked about is how genuinely horrifying they are, just on a like a scare level and on, you know, they work. They're horror films.
All right,
I mean, we end
absolutely.
up talking about the larger themes and the production and the hype surrounding them and all of these things, but it's a testament that we can talk about that without ever questioning the fact that they are really genuinely goddamn terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. Well, go bringing it back to aliens. I actually jumped, and I can't remember the last time I did, and it was the simplest thing when Paul Reiser is putting his face up against the container with
The
the
slither we hate.
with the
Yeah.
face hugger. and it gets real quiet. And he just puts it up, and then it just goes boom,
Yeah.
and then it goes against the glass. I was like, "What?" You know what I mean? Because I knew what was going, what potentially could happen. You
Yeah.
know, it was just a really weird moment,
And it's
and
all from a single sound effect. Bonk.
yep, a small one, as a matter of fact, and it just shows you the psychological buildup that to their credit, Cameron and Ridley Scott and were able to build up in it just with the presence of the monster and what you knew was possible,
Yeah.
and just one technical note. I guess we haven't really been too technical here. Ridley Scott, just going back to the other two films that we talked about, Alien and Prometheus. He does it. He does this great thing, man, and he does it more effectively than I think I've seen other people do it. Is that as soon as you get that scare, like it's a silent buildup, and then there's this giant, there's a giant attack, and like when something jumps at you, he does it in both films, and it scares the ever living shit out of you, and then he immediately cuts to outside of the ship
Mm-hmm.
or something, and then you just hear
He
quiet,
almost
and it
interrupts his own scare in the middle of it and leaves you to sit there in the silence, like, well,
yeah,
wait, what's going on? What just
yeah.
happened?
There's such a violence in the movement and the sound that the only thing that could top it is the silence of what happened, of cutting to the outside of that
I
scene.
think you're
It's just
probably in the original Alien. You're referring to the face hugger coming out of the egg, smashes onto the guy's helmet. He falls back, and then all of a sudden you're outside, and all you hear is
yes,
whoosh.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But he also does it in Prometheus. I noted. I think almost it might be the mirror scene.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure. I've only seen it. I saw it in the theater with glasses on, so I'm pretty sure that he does it. He employs the same tactic there.
The
So
other
Well, I think
thing to
that's
comment on is the acting in all of these movies. The directors have always paid attention to good performances,
yeah.
and especially in the first three with Sigourney Weaver, she ruled that character, and she was really good through all of them. But the supporting characters in every film were extraordinary, and Joe, going back to Alien 3, Charles Dutton was just a fantastic character as the sort of preacher man who's, you know, keeping everyone in line in the colony, and all those directors have paid attention to acting, which again goes back to making you care about who gets killed and making you care about the people and the motivations on screen. So worth noting.
absolutely, absolutely. Ash, any last comments on Aliens, any of the various Xenoform
Well,
films?
one thing that we mentioned about sort of having this very very abrupt scare, and then we're cutting away to sort of be left in silence. I mean, that's when you can tell that a person gets the idea of horror, and they get the idea of the fact that that scare is the finality of death. It's abrupt,
Mhm.
it's sudden,
Mm,
and then there's silence.
there's
Right.
nothing after.
Right, which is horrifying to think about.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good
Nicely
point.
done. As you are full of wisdom nuggets tonight.
Next
Guys,
episode will totally be in Yoda speak, broken English across the board, just to drive it home.
let's go to our ratings of this film. Ash, let's start with you. What do you got for me, man?
This film has a huge place in my heart. Liking it so much when I was younger, and again, we're talking about a follow-up to an iconic film that basically created a subgenre to a sequel of an iconic film that created a subgenre. Um, to be honest with you, as much as there are some silly, goofy moments that I can find in it now, I would rate it as highly as Alien if it were not a sequel. So I'm gonna give it 4 stars.
Wow, that's a pretty high rating there. Ash, you sure about that?
I still love the movie,
All
in
right.
spite of its flaws. Gotta love Aliens.
Yeah, definitely. Billy, what do you got?
I got another half star for you. I got to go with 3.5 stars. I think the technical achievement of that movie is something that has been and should be marveled at. It is the most extraordinary production, just shot by shot. You just look at what he did. But there is, especially going back this time, I just felt that. the script and the characters, they were just too infantile for me. It was very much the product of a 14-year-old boy's imagination, and limited the scope and didn't expand the mythology behind the stories as much as it could have. So solid 3.5.
Cool. I really dug a lot of the film. I mean, I think the lair down there was really creepy. Yeah, some of the characters irked me a little bit, but Cameron's ability to keep me riveted for what would you say it was 40 minutes, Billy? I mean, that's something to be seen. I'm gonna come somewhere in the middle here on this one, guys, and give it 3 stars. So let us say our goodbyes. I am absolutely exhausted, and I will never give Tom a hard time ever again. He has quite a hell of a job here, man, and my hats are off to you, Tom. It was a blast talking about these films, but keeping all these balls juggling at the same time. I can't focus on the movie so much. I got to focus on what everybody's saying and moving along. And it was a trip, man. But that said, it's been a blast, man. Billy, it was cool talking to you, man.
Indeed. Next time I see Tom, I'm going to kick him in the balls just for good measure.
Yeah, it's just kind of the way that Ridley Scott kicked you in the balls with Prometheus.
There's been a lot of ball kicking in this episode, so Tom needs some. And Tom, go kick Max in the balls.
Yeah. So cool, man. Our film Time Travelers is out, man, and you guys can check it out on the post that we'll post with the show on the Horror Palace, and you can also find it on my website, christianaproductions.com. Follow the links to the films and Time Travelers, and the password is coincidence, and you will see the work of mine and Billy's cinematography, and real good stuff. If you guys dig it, drop us a line, tell us what you think. Billy, we also are going to be starting pre-production on another film called Experiments in Killing, it looks like.
This is an interesting pronoun we use.
Yes. I am drafting you, kind of like Sigourney Weaver got drafted to be an advisor in the Aliens.
I get full flight status after this mission?
Yes, your license gets reinstated.
All right.
Yeah, so development's on the way, man. It was a blast talking to you, brother.
Always, man. It's an epic subject to tackle, and it's no wonder we venture out at the end, tired, exhausted, beaten, and covered in KY jelly.
Oof, yeah, man. I mean, all these movies start to biomorph in my brain, and they all become one, and it's quite a trip and an incredible universe that these folks have created, man.
Indeed, man. Awesome talking with you about it.
Yeah. Ash, it was good talking to you again too, man. Thank you so much for reviewing these films with us.
I had a great time as always. It was a pleasure, guys.
Cool. Tell everybody where they can check you out.
People can actually stop by horrorfix.com, and we've been releasing an original horror novel month per month, chapter by chapter. So every month you can stop by, and amidst the news and reviews and everything we have, you can read a horror novel for free. It was actually a horror novel that I wrote.
You wrote that? Yeah, I didn't actually realize that you wrote that, man. Congratulations and kudos on that, man. That's great.
Thank you. So we've got a lot of interesting stuff coming up, and we're always looking for new bloggers too. So anybody wants to stop by and submit some of the reviews, let us know. We'll take a look at them.
I am going to go and print out some of your novel, or as much as your novel that's released so far, and bring it with me when I take off here in a couple of days. How many chapters have you released so far?
The first 2.
The first 2. Okay, right. Sorry if I missed that. I'm a little bit burnt myself, man.
It happens.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to checking that out, man. As always, man, it's a pleasure talking to you.
It's been great. It's been a great experience as always.
And Ash, I can't wait to hear some good news with your girlfriend.
I will definitely let you guys know. I have another show to do with you guys, which is literally days before she's supposed to give birth. So if it doesn't happen before then, you never know. We might have a show where you might be minus a host in the middle of it, depending on how far apart the contractions are.
This is Ash Hamilton broadcasting live from the delivery room.
And something stinks. Yeah.
Yeah, man, we might have a mini hangman on our hands pretty soon, huh?
Yeah. Grace and Quinn be coming into the world hopefully in the next 4 weeks.
Oh, cool. Nice, man. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for reviewing the bookends of the Alien series.
Aliens is not so much the sequel to Alien as it is the sequel to the late night diner conversations about Alien. It gives us the coolness and the novelty of the original by taking those ideas and questions and expanding them. What is the world of Alien like, and how does it differ from the world now? What kinds of weapons do they have in this world? What if instead of blue-collar workers, the alien was up against a band of gun-toting, foul-mouthed, trigger-happy space marines? Our story opens with the sole survivor of the first film, Ripley, still in a heavy cryosleep as the salvage team finds her and her cat 57 years after the events of the original. After recounting the events that left her crew dead, she is held accountable for her actions of self-preservation, which, coincidentally, resulted in the destruction of corporation property totaling into tens of millions. The Weyland-Yutani Corporation quickly revokes our heroine's flight license, telling her that the planet whose distress signal they responded to has been colonized for the last 20 years, therefore throwing her testimony out in an act of true douchebaggery. Fast forward to Ripley taking the only job she can on the loading docks when, out of the blue, Weyland-Yutani loses contact with their colony. Asking for Ripley's help, the corporation leverages the reinstatement of her flight license, and Ripley, along with company rep Paul Reiser,
And talk about it?
I think that one of the strengths of Alien, we talked about the mystery of it, was the fact that it hinted at bigger ideas.
Right.
And I think that that could have been a very standalone approach to one movie, was, let's make the audience speculate, let's give them something to talk about that falls outside of the sort of 1, 2, 3 punch of the film, and how the film was brought to its conclusion, but have something that's persistent, something that persists far beyond it. So whether or not they actually felt, I think that was going to be expanded on, I think that they really capitalize on this idea of let's hint at bigger things. And if we hint at bigger things, we can show a scope outside of what the camera sees that makes the film a little more epic, even with the fact that it's obviously a very intimate setting with a very limited cast.
Yeah, I mean, it's just pretty amazing. It's hard to do this. It's hard to see this all while you're watching all these films all together. And I gotta be honest with you guys, I watched Aliens and then Alien 3, like back to back, like a double feature pretty much. And
I did too.
I'm having trouble like discerning one from the other. And Alien and Prometheus, I'm like, because it's different when you see these films.
The theft will still be persistent, but we know where it originated. So
and they'll wonder where it came from, no doubt.
Right, we've got it on record. But yeah, that's how I really felt about this film. It would have been a very logical choice to take the same scenario in the original and sort of overlay a paint-by-number script and just try to replicate the high points of it. But, I really think that the film was a what-if scenario. These were people that were sitting around going, wouldn't it be cool if this happened? What if this would happen? How can we make this happen? And fortunately, some pretty good decisions actually came out of those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I guess now that I think about it, one of the big questions that I have about the whole series is just how much did the original Alien have in mind with, the space jockey and the engineer and, what the aliens are and how they reproduce and their whole, I think it's called eusocialism or whatever. They're eusocial like a wasp or whatever, a bee. Was that all in place, do you think, in the original Alien? And they had that much discipline or whatever it was to not get into it, to leave it for, James Cameron to come along and
Reiser's Burke fights for a sinister corporate agenda, and the real monster finally makes its appearance. It is Weyland-Yutani's deception and ultimately inhuman lust for profit shares that makes our character's struggles that much more personal. It has often been said that to compare Scott's Alien to Cameron's Aliens is like comparing apples to oranges. I disagree. I think the inability to compare the two should be a hallmark of any great episodic story. Not only did Alien set a benchmark for genre sequels, it also set a benchmark for Cameron's career as he went on to direct the current top 2 worldwide grossing films of all time. My only criticism of Aliens is not a fault of its own, but in that its iconic action movie portrayal of the Marines has been so overused and copied over the last 26 years that in retrospect it is almost a parody of itself. Well, That and the director's choice not to use Queen's Killer Queen when we first see the Queen alien, which would have been balls out awesome.
That is great.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good points there, man.
Ash, I think my new favorite idea is making a sequel not to the film, but making a sequel to the conversations about the film.
Yeah.
That is one of the most astute observations I've ever heard, and I'm going to steal that from you and use it in the future.
Well, at least we've been able to coin the term here. So they're in a group of surly firepower-packing Marines is on her way to LV-426. The rest of the film follows a core group of the soldiers, along with Ripley and Reiser's character Burke, as they attempt to escape the legions of aliens on LV-426 with their lives. Although we are treated to a who survives and what will be left of them formula, Cameron's approach almost single-handedly redefined the subgenre of sci-fi action. There is a giddy love and reference for Scott's universe that makes Cameron's film approachable, and in some terms a more mainstream and digestible approach to the franchise. Cameron's soldiers are stereotyped, sure, but are still likable, and we genuinely want to see them live to fight another day. Ripley is stronger, and somehow her wisdom in the face of Weyland-Yutani's greedy naivety makes her ever more the hero. Henriksen's take on the human-loving android Bishop again brings our audience to sympathize with yet another character, this one almost incapable of complete destruction, yet somehow we still fear for his safety. Again, we are dealing with expansion, this time of the classic character archetype. So it might all seem like glitz and spent shells, but Aliens introduces an interesting social narrative into the film that continues throughout the rest of the series. The aliens, as vicious as they are, represent an investment, and corporations like to earn a return on their investments. As Ripley and the Colonial Marines fight for their lives,